Good morning, fellow citizens of Namibia, and welcome to the COVID-19 Communications Centre daily update at 10 o'clock in the morning. This morning, we're talking about the effects of COVID-19 and the lockdown on the hospitality and tourism sector, and delving deeply into that topic as we look at what measures have been put in place to protect this very important sector in Namibia. But before that, as usual, we'll have a health update, which is simply a brief around any happenings or developments in the health sector. And to help me do that, I call upon Dr. Theo Ben Kandetu to come and give our health update. Doctor?
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Minister. This morning I have a very brief update from the Ministry of Health. So the information I will be communicating today is basically a repeat of yesterday in terms of statistics. We still have 16 confirmed cases. No new cases have been reported as of this morning. No deaths have been reported as well as of this morning. Again, there are 13 active cases currently, 3 recoveries. All the patients are asymptomatic, which means they are without symptoms, and they are all doing well. From the laboratory side, NIP and Pathcare, as of this morning, have tested a combined 449 samples, and that number continues to increase. I gave an update yesterday regarding an initiative that was embarked on by Ministry of Health as well as our key stakeholders, called Project Active Case Finding. The purpose of this is to identify the possibility of community transmission of COVID-19 in the country. I mentioned that this was a project that we embarked on in Khomas region, Erongo region, as well as Karas region. I'm pleased to report that so far we have tested 29 cases from this project, which, as I mentioned, aims to identify any community transmission. All 29 have tested negative so far, which is very, very good news. So then just In closing, again, just an update on quarantine. The number still stands at 105 people who are in mandatory quarantine facilities throughout the country. But as mentioned earlier, as these people near the end of their quarantine period, they will be released. As always, the public is reminded to adhere to the rules and regulations of social distancing and hand hygiene, and please use the Emergency Operations Center's toll-free hotline 0800 100 100 for any COVID-related questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kandetu, for that brief health update. We're very happy that we still have 16 cases and 13 that are active and 3 recovered and no deaths. So thank you very much, Dr. Kandetu, who is the head of case management in the Ministry of Health and Social Services. As earlier said, today we're talking about all things tourism and the hospitality sector, and I'll be moderating a panel around the effects of COVID-19 and the lockdown on that particular sector. And to join me delve into that topic, I'm joined by Honorable Pohamba Shifeta, who is the Minister in the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism. Thank you very much for joining us, Honorable. I'm also joined by Mr. Bernd Schneider, who is the Chairman of the Namibia Tourism Association. Thank you very much for joining us, as well as Mr. Dingu Nalbep, who is the CEO of the Namibia Tourism Board. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Also to assist with any technical questions and support, we have staff members from the Ministry of Environment, which is Mr. Ngitila, who is the ED, as well as Mr. Sam Shikongo, who is the Director of Tourism. Well, to begin today's discussion, perhaps we'll start with you, Honorable Minister, really around of course, the effects of COVID-19 on the tourism sector. It has been one of the sectors that have come to a complete standstill because of the effects of COVID-19. Would like to know how has the impact been so far? What have been the measures put in place, and what are the stakeholders in the tourism sector doing to prepare for either an extended impact of COVID-19 or a post-COVID-19 plan after all of this is over?
Thank you very much. First, let me start by saying this, that the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector has been felt since last year, end of last year, because the tourists cancelled the bookings. There were many cancellations of bookings last year, already by October, November, December. And already November, December, many of those guests who were supposed to occupy those accommodation facilities cancelled their traveling. Now, and this is because already by that time, countries like China have already started putting up measures to contain the spread of COVID-19. And that, of course, had some global economic impact on especially on our side, as we have tourists we depend on tourists coming from different countries. Now, this year, already in the industry, you already saw the lying of some of the workers in the industry. Some were put on unpaid leave already, and they could only afford, some of the companies could only afford to pay their workers until end of March. That means you have a majority of workers employed in the industry who are currently at home on unpaid leave, and some were also retrenched completely. Depends on what will happen now, how long it will take for recovery, but especially for the measures we are taking, which are, of course, are necessary. We have to take these measures in order to contain the spread of this disease especially and when we allow it to spread uncontrollably, the economy will be completely flattened. Now, what is happening in the industry now is that the industry, most of the companies, if not all, almost every company now in the industry has to send their workers home. And you talk about this approximately 120,000 directly and indirectly employed in the tourism industry and the hospitality. Now you have a huge number of employees sent home currently, and that definitely has an impact on the economy, in the general economy. And so you know that tourism generates more than 26 billion to the general economy, contribute to the GDP, and that already it's already projected that you will not have that money at all. So it is something that frightening, especially our livelihood.
All right, thank you very much, Minister, for that. Perhaps we could move over to Mr. Schneider. Of course, there has been measures put in place with regards to lockdown in the two regions, but a state of emergency and regulations continue to be in effect in the whole country. How has the sector adhered to some of these regulations, and what are the challenges being experienced with that regard?
Thank you. Maybe let's start off with your first part of the question. I think the tourism sector in general has been exemplary in following the regulations as stated through the state of emergency and through the lockdown. Most of the tourism enterprises, since they were not declared as an essential service, have closed doors. As the Minister stated, we currently are facing a situation where not even local travel is possible, which means we currently have huge amounts of car rental companies where the cars are just standing in the yard because they simply cannot be used anymore. Lodges are effectively closed. We've got many accommodation establishments that have informed us as associations already that they have ceased operations till end of June. So to answer your question about the lockdown itself has been actually taken very seriously by the tourism industry. From what we can see and what we hear is that across the board, people actually adhere to it. And, well, there's a logic reason to it, because we simply don't have any guests anymore. There simply is no more guests available. There's no more travel at the moment available. And I would like to give a bit of an insight on what we perceive, or what my opinion is on where this is going to. And there's a lot of talk about once we end the lockdown, and we see what our neighboring countries are doing, like Botswana, like Zimbabwe, like South Africa, who've extended their lockdown till the end of April. Irrespective of what we in Namibia are doing and deem to be doing, I think it needs to be made very clear that we from the tourism industry fully and 100% support that human lives need to come first. But the approach that has been taken is where there has been a choice between either economy or human lives. I personally believe that there does not need to be a choice. We can actually have both. We can protect the human lives as best as possible, yet at the same time there are also ways and means where we can still encourage the economy to at least in parts continue going. And this is where I'm heading to, is that for tourism there are various scenarios on where we're going to. And Namibia is a country where we derive most of our tourism revenues, the money that actually pays for salaries, the money that keeps the economy going, is derived from plus minus between 500,000 and 600,000 foreign or overseas nationals that are coming to visit Namibia. Of course, we do have a small local market, but currently, or till date, the biggest money was generated by these clients. And international travel in a realistic scenario is not going to pick up in this year. That's unfortunately the harsh reality. on how and when these travel restrictions, and it doesn't necessarily mean we in Namibia on how we restrict it, also is very dependent on how the rest of the world restricts their citizens on leaving the country or what regulations they put in place and as to when they return from elsewhere in the world. And realistic scenarios see that the international travel component probably will not be unrestricted as it has been for the remainder of this year, which unfortunately entails that for a country like Namibia, where we have a huge income from international travel, that the knock is not only going to be over once we end our lockdown. We need to be, as an industry, we need to be very clever on how we can move forward for it. And as I've mentioned, I personally believe that any lockdown scenario where we want to first and foremost protect human lives, but also encourage economic stimulus, will happen in stages. Where, for example, let's take this on a Namibian scenario where we, for example, in Namibia currently have a very, very small number of infections, which is great. Which means currently, if there's no infections in Namibia, if we can control it, and that is something that the Ministry of Health and those professionals would need to verify, that we could open up local travel, that people can go from Windhoek, for example, to Swakopmund, these kind of things. And under very controlled circumstances that, for example, restaurants would still be able to operate. And that's just, for example, say they would be able to operate in the same way like supermarkets currently do. They would be granted a permission to open up if they can ensure that guests sit 2 meters apart. There are certain ways and means, but at least through that we would be able to, again, get a bit of revenue going and get companies the opportunity to actually start working with that small little market that could potentially be there. And I think that's a very, very important and urgent message that we need to do. And maybe just to add on to that one, everybody thinks as tourism industry, the first thing that comes into mind is lodges, is tour operators, is tour guides. Well, like the Honourable Minister said, those currently have absolutely no business, none whatsoever. But what is also included is all the small little shops that live off tourism, but they're not directly in your mind. And like, for example, bakeries, the bakery in Uchu, I use that example quite a lot because that is one of the key examples who basically live off the tour buses driving past. Now that there are not any tour buses anymore, they're going to be equally faced with very hard times. Same as souvenir shops, same as jewelers and whatever, that very often sold their products to international clients who are no longer there. And those are all companies that are very much affected equally through this whole crisis. And we need to figure out a way on how we can get out of this complete lockdown situation where absolutely no travel, not even for locals, is possible, to a situation where we can gradually open up, and obviously with the hope rather sooner than later to have the international market returning to us. But the international market is very dependent on what the rest of the world does. The local market we can control. Through that we would possibly even be able to support our own companies such as NWR to go to national parks, which at the moment is not possible. So local travel is going to be the first step of a more normalized world. But let me put it, unfortunately, in the harshest possible way. Tourism is going to be in for a tough, tough ride, not only in the next couple of weeks or months, but probably this is going to impact us for quite a lot still into 2021. And
Thank you.
Even though at the moment we are one of the sectors which is the hardest hit, the ripple effects to the rest of the economy, they are still unfolding. And once this pandemic is over, and rest assured it will be over sometime, the glimmer of hope is that tourism is probably going to be the sector, despite the current hard hitting, that is going to be instrumental in building up our economy again once we get to that point.
Thank you,
So,
Mr. Schneider.
Yeah, it's necessary to help protect our industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Well, Mr. Nalpip, Mr. Schneider speaks a little bit about the current situation and measures being put in place. And he mentioned really around, depending on how the situation goes, whether it improves or not, and especially if it improves, it's important to look at local travel and as a measure to get the tourism industry to actually recover. At this current moment, how has the local tourism industry done before COVID-19, and how can it add value should some regulations be relaxed if the situation gets better to allow for the economic activity in the sector to pick up?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I think I just want to, before I get to that point, allude to the fact that Bent has indicated. In fact, when you look at the international statistical models that are currently being developed in terms of looking at tourism recovery plan post-COVID-19, we are currently in the stage of shutdown. And in the state of shutdown, the characteristics of such a stage is that definitely businesses have come to a complete standstill. And that's likewise the same in Namibia, except probably a few exceptions where you have some lodges that are offering quarantine facilities and so forth. So really, quite a number of them have closed. The statistics we have is like 6,000 vehicles are currently parked and not being rented. Information we have as Namibia Tourism Board is about 28 businesses have indicated to us they have closed up to end of June, about 1,200 employees, but it could be more because they have never reported. Some of them have not reported. So it's a very much impacted sector, so to speak. But now when you look at it from the COVID strategy point of view in terms of what WTTC and UNWTO is telling us, of course you have to do it gradually. So the scenarios are on the table are, if the lockdown is going to be opened up in terms of global by end of April, we're looking at people making about 25% of sales based on 2019 figures. But if it is still extended to May, we're looking at 5% of sales of figures. And if it is further extended to June, we are looking at 2%. So by end, if we could extend it up until end of June, you are likely to find a situation where quite a number of businesses, to be quite frank and blunt, will go bust. Definitely they will end because the smaller businesses, which is a 1 person or 2 person, probably will still survive when we recover because they probably need about 2, 3, 4, 5 bookings and then they can still make ends meet. Bigger, larger companies, which has probably put together quite a number of investments somewhere in terms of cash flow, might still survive. But the medium-sized businesses where owners are using their own cash to try and run and operate such businesses definitely will have dire consequences because even as much as there is in terms of loan payment, obviously the income is not coming up into June and they will be suffering. However, even if at no matter at end of April or May or June, the next stage will be for us to relax some restrictions to allow for local travel. But then you look at the uniqueness of the Namibia as a country in itself. Yes, when you look at the figures that was published by WTTC in 2018 in terms of accommodation, use or occupancy, domestic featured very highly. But then you have to go back and dissect those figures. And large proportion of those were more business travelers. That means there were government officials or business employees who would go for meetings or attending to some other issues that would have made use of that accommodation facilities. And a very lesser number is a leisure travel market. Obviously, knowing us as Namibians, surely, even if we give you a discount, sometimes we do not have that culture and that ethos of traveling. However, I would, as a Namibian, probably splash 10,000 or even 5,000 for a one-day party for my reputational gain, but I wouldn't really spend 10,000 for traveling for a weekend. So there are those dynamics that comes into play. As much as we are trying to see gradual opening up and try to rely on domestic travel, but it is not going to be, it is not a very significant size of a market segment. Yes, there are those few that will benefit, such as the guest houses and hotels in city centers, but those in the rural areas, when it comes to domestic tourism, especially your upmarket luxury traveling accommodation, which probably charges between 5,000 to 10,000 per person per night, would still be heavily affected, as much as we may be gradually opening up, which is a good thing, because it is also an approach which is being proposed by WTC and UNWTO. Rather than to abruptly open up your borders, do a gradual process which you then look at domestic travel and then slowly go to the phase of relaxation, that is to allow now your regional travel. But now when you look at the regional travel, your top 5 destinations is South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Angola. But what would those neighbors do? Would they still open their borders and allow their nationals to travel to Namibia for business or be leisure? That's a question that remains, because the problem with the corona is that we are not sure when it will definitely end, unless by some miracle a vaccine is found. Then probably, because tourism is a very psychological product, because I need to feel safe and secure and be certain if I enter that very place, obviously, was the place sanitized? Where will I not be exposed to getting any infection? So all these things is an issue that needs to be taken into account. Besides, even if we are opening up, one never knows. Even though we have 16 cases and we open within probably 2 or 3 weeks, there might be a new foray of infections or new isolations coming up. And again, then we have to go down to lockdown. So all these are very unpredictable situations in which we are finding ourselves. But having said that, one has to take that risk as a nation and see whether you can gradually open up and allow some form of travel and business operations so that people could still get jobs, still be paid. Because if you can extend the lockdown up until May or June, definitely consequences are going to be dire, because companies will no longer probably have money, cash flow to pay salaries. I'm not sure with the government emergency measure how long government will be able to come to aid for smaller businesses or any other tourism businesses to pay or contribute or supplement towards the wages or salaries that the tourism industry is going to be paid. So the impact and the dynamics around it is better complex than being very simplistic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naupep. Honorable Minister, of course, tourism is not only some of the entities we have highlighted here already, it's also rural communities and conservancies that also depend on tourists coming to the country. How have they been affected by these measures?
Yes, the conservation and tourism, there is a nexus. The conservation and tourism, they are inextricably linked in Namibia. Tourists come here because of wildlife attraction and the preservation of cultural artifacts and buildings and also our landscape. Now, you have the other industries, like for instance, hunting industry that is heavily affected. There will be no trophy hunting, and through trophy hunting, the proceeds help to maintain those conservancies, community conservancies, and also to pay the game guards. We have thousands of game guards who are looking after our animals in those conservancies. Definitely, there will be no income for them. The maintenance of our parks, because we generate money from hunting, trophy hunting, and deploy back this money into conservation, especially for the game product trust fund, to fund those activities in the parks and the conservancies. There will be no money for that. Let's hope that it will not go far, but the way I look at it, generally, we are already in a recession for a couple of years. Now, if it continues now, this whole measures we are taking, because it's good to take measures, that is perfect, in order to contain the further spread of this virus, but also has got a negative impact on the economy. Because the measure you take, it has a negative impact on the economy, then it suppresses the economy. At the end, from economic recession will go into the depression, and it will last for many years. That means the recovery process will be slow. Not only in Namibia, but globally. And you need some buying power for these tourists to travel who have got money. That's also one thing. And also to come and be able to buy tech for trophy hunting. That one, the projection is that you will have a decline in that market completely. And it is already failed that even business, there's a complete decline. So it will definitely affect our conservation in general. And that, let's hope that we have to assist one another in this, because we have to have some kind of assistance towards this conservation, especially community conservancies, because we have no money now to assist these game guards to look after these animals and to do the maintenance of these conservancies, let alone parks, national parks, or the 20 national parks we have. There will be a lack of cash. And of course, the physicals now targeting priorities to contain the COVID-19, not to spread further. There will be little money left in the fiscus to diversify this money to those necessities. So there's complete impact, negative impact on the conservation in general in Namibia, and that will definitely affect tourism in the country. So, but I'm still optimistic, though pessimistic. Things they will be resilient in some years, but it will take time. We are talking about business, and some of them even thinking of probably getting to bankruptcy, apply for bankruptcy, because they can no longer contain, because even the recovery process, when it takes long, definitely they have to honor their debts. The creditors are asking. That's why there's a need for us to put heads together so that we can assist those creditors can also look at with a messy eye to those debtors, so that we don't force them into bankruptcy. And you will see that some of the business will completely close, and they also, some of the owners will get discouraged, especially the middle, the SMEs. They will definitely have that. They will be discouraged. Maybe they will go and put their investment, if they survive, into some other industries. So it is something that really affects Namibia completely, with the small economy, and also with our businesses in the industry depend on the daily income. So without that, the whole industry is affected, and that has got ripple effect to other industries as well.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I now give the opportunity for the media to ask questions, although I still have a number to ask questions around any of the discussions we had this morning. Any hands? We have one. So you may come take the mic. You may come to the mic.
Good morning. My name is Stephen. I write for Commerce and Industry Review magazine. Honourable Minister, my question is on the number of workers that have been laid off so far or sent on unpaid leave. We hear of a company, the Hotel Hilton. They laid off, I think, 100 plus workers since the beginning of the COVID problem. Now, yesterday we heard that this is it's a criminal offense actually to take such a decision. Now, my question to you is there anything you are doing to help solve that kind of problem? Is the ministry looking into solving the problem of those people? And then the second question is, late last year, or is it early this year, the ministry, your ministry announced that they have taken over the function of doing the fencing. We're at a time when we need every kind of business to stimulate the economy. Are you going perhaps to revise that decision so that you give business to the people? Can you hear me?
Can you repeat the second question?
This one comes from the decision that was made by your ministry early this year, that you are taking over the responsibility of fencing the national parks and removing the middlemen, what you call the middlemen. Now we are at a time when we need every possible economic activity to stimulate the economy, to get the people working. Given the problem we are in, are you going to revise this decision? And again, on your decision to give the fencing to your workers, it also tells us that you perhaps have a lot of people in the ministry that were doing nothing, that all of a sudden they are given work to fence. I mean, what were they doing before the fencing work? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? One more. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, my name is Shaligan Peterson. I'm from Eagle FM. This is to all the panelists. What do you think the tourism and hospitality industry will look like after COVID-19? And have you put any measures in place or any plan in place? Is there any discussion going around rebuilding the industry after COVID-19? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. I think we'll get to responses. Honourable Minister.
Yes, maybe I will start with the question, the last question. The first speaker, the question of fencing, whether we had a lot of employees that were doing nothing. Not at all. You know that we came up with a plan to have a kind of division between the anti-poaching unit, which we have established recently for a couple of years, and we started recruiting. We have recruited some members, and we want to make sure that there's a distinction between anti-poaching unit and those who are just for the protection of animals. Then those that are maintaining parks and looking after animals, the well-being of animals. That means maintaining the water holes, making sure that the fences are maintained and the equipment in the parks are properly maintained. Now there's a demarcation between the two. Right now we have these two were all working, doing the multitask. So you have those that are the same people that are doing anti-poaching work, that are the same people that are doing maintenance of parks. Now we have these two divided now. So the people who are now protecting, that's why they are trained as soldiers, trained to make sure that they combat these illegal poachers, and these ones are properly are completely different. Now that you have at least the team that is now doing the maintenance of parks, we use this team to do the fencing, because we have recruited the anti-poaching, and they will be definitely doing the work of protecting the animals from illegal being poached. So that is now what is happening, and it's not that these people were doing nothing. Definitely the fencing of Etosha National Park has been affected already. First, because of social distancing, you will need only a couple of few people that are working, and also they have to be distant. So you have definitely a negative impact on the fencing. So even the projection that we said that within 3 years we have to complete this, it might not be realized. And you will not need more people working at one side. So you have to divide different sites, and there will be demand for skilled labor and the supervisors because of that intervention. The package to help, and first the employees, how many employees lie down so far. We cannot really give the exact figures, but some of the companies, they were forced to retrench their workers. And you talk of more than 1,000 that the workers currently retrenched. And we said, as I said, all the businesses are closed in the tourism and the hospitality. You have few those that are probably doing catering there, here and there, but those are very, very few. Because the service in the tertiary industry demands that, like just the same as primary industry, you have more people close, especially in the industry, tertiary industry, giving services. And they have to do that at work. You cannot have people working from home. So they have to be together. Now, to prevent the further spread and also not to expose our employees, because you are saving those who are coming from different countries, and they probably, because of the lack or because of the containment of the disease in some of the countries, have gone beyond their control. So you will definitely have a third or fourth person infected. That's why we have to put up measures completely and to ensure that we contain the further spread, especially not to expose the workers. And I think the companies, they have done a good job just to make sure that they put their employees, they send them home, and also will be able to cope, especially with the cost, the expenses. Labor and the others will definitely call them back. Probably they will start, of course, with some others. But the question of payment now, these people most of them are lie down. Only few companies who can afford to pay their workers full salary while they're at home. But the majority of them, they cannot. So they either have to negotiate on half salary or none at all, just to have a non-paid leave. And that also depends as to when. So that's why the government came up with the rescue stimulus package. And this package is not meant to assist companies, but to make sure that at least companies still can pay the subsidies on the salaries part, so that you can still maintain and those employees and not to retrench them. So, and the modality will be worked out sooner, so that it will then start unfolding, so that the companies in industry can apply for that. So, but that can only be for certain months, or 1 or 2, because the fiscal coffers have been stretched too much. As we know that the economy is very small, and they will go beyond even our GDP. If we had to go for months and months, and we will be like this, definitely the economy will be affected. And even those major economies have been completely affected. So what about Namibia, the small economy? Definitely we will have to bear the brand in the future. On the question of tourism and the industry, how it will look like after this, that depends also how long these measures have to be taken, and in order to contain the spread of this COVID-19, how long are we going to have labor force at home and nothing is done? Because you must understand that this has got a very negative impact, not only on the demand side, because there is no supply now. The market economy is completely declining. So even if you have now the business opens, the current supply now in the market globally is probably the production of health facilities and health equipment. So everything is down. So there's no buying power because labor, people are not getting money, and definitely it will take long. And that's why I'm saying this will completely, definitely develop into depression, because then it will last more years before we recover. But let us be still optimistic that it will definitely recover, but it will take long.
Thank you. Mr. Naube, in answering that
Yeah,
question.
no, thank you very much.
Maybe you could also just add, from the information you got from the different hospitality places, what happened to the tourists that were in the facilities once the measures were announced? What happened to those? And then you can answer the question.
Yeah, actually, as we all know, there were quite a number of international tourists that had remained by the time that the complete lockdown was done. But of course, with private sector and all of them working with the German embassy, there was at the end a solution that these people had to be evacuated back home to Germany, and some had to travel beyond Germany to where they were originating. So probably at this stage, one would probably have very few international tourists that must have probably remained in the country, because I think same is now happening in South Africa. Quite a lot of repatriations are being done. So to speak, as Ben said earlier, the accommodation facilities are no longer having clients for them to operate full force. Possibly maybe skeleton staff to probably do maintenance, and all the routine kind of maintenance and all that probably is currently ongoing. But as rightly we all know, business is completely close to non-existence. However, to your question is that in the short term, yes, business has been happening. Businesses have submitted their tax returns. Some have been audited. There are no disputes. So we would be urging on government that at least some of those funds could be released to tourism businesses to aid their cash flow. Even the corporates who probably before lockdown had invoices outstanding, definitely that a little will help for these businesses to smoothen their operations. But to the plan of what are we doing post-COVID-19, we haven't yet as an industry yet gone into details. We've just only started discussing that more recently. But of course, being COVID a very unprecedented scenario that we do not know when it's going to end. But besides that, there are quite a lot of things that we need to put in place. For example, post-COVID-19, we need to be attractive as a destination, because sub-Saharan Africa currently takes up only about between 5 to 15% of the global tourism. So it's not a huge chunk of tourism that we are getting. But for that, probably the Namibia Airports Company needs to look at easing or reducing passenger fees, landing rights to attract more airlines traveling. But again, if that is done, the airlines must also pass on that cost to the client to have a reduced fare rates. That way to probably excite people to travel to Namibia. But if even that is done, then us as a tourism businesses locally probably have to also look at again reviewing our costs. But again, all these are to take into account the fixed overhead costs that we have, and to what margin of error do we have in terms of reducing our price and having more attractive packaging. And besides that, even if we have done that, there has to be a communication in terms of media and all that, and that is the baby of Namibia Tourism Board. But again, you are sitting with the organization whose main artery of livelihood was from tourism levies, because you were charging 1% or 2% for every tourist that stays in accommodation establishment with zero tourists. Definitely no income is coming our way. Of course, government contribution has been going down. So that also needs to be reviewed as part of this whole composite of issues, because as I said, tourism touches every nerve that in the end compositely produces a stimuli, whether the stimuli is a pain or happiness. But those touch points needs to be coordinated and in sync. And I guess we have to comprehensively look at that and come up with a strategy. How do we recover beyond COVID? But as we know, as I said, the international models indicate if at all we recover in the fourth quarter or the third quarter, which is September or the December, 2021 will be a challenging year. People are looking at full recovery of global tourism to the same levels of 2019 around June 2022. So obviously there's quite a landscape of tourism, as you have asked me, would greatly be changed when you are looking at that. When is the tourism industry going to recover?
Thank you very much, Nabib. Mr. Schneider?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to actually, mostly on the question of the lady from Eagle FM, like to give a bit of insight on that. Well, maybe first and foremost, since COVID popped up on the radar, on the tourism radar, which was basically end of 2019, mid of January 2020, tourism companies worldwide have already in some form been reacting towards that. The first stage were cancellations or withholding bookings and so forth. And with every day and more and more countries closing down and whatever, obviously the situation changes, and which makes it a very difficult situation for tourism to deal with. But maybe just to put everybody's mind at ease, there's a lot happening in the background. There's a tremendous amount of work being done, and not only in Namibia, but worldwide. Tourism is the biggest economic sector worldwide, and there's a lot of clever people already working overtime in the background and trying figuring out on how can we move forward on this one. Now, fortunately, we in Namibia, and this is my personal opinion, I think we are in a post-COVID scenario. We are a very fortunate destination. Namibia, for many, many years, had the national slogan of the country of the wide open spaces. Now, in a situation where social distancing is generally advised, that definitely fits the picture. So I generally believe that Namibia has not lost or has suffered any reputational damage as a destination, which is a very, very good thing, which is a good basis to rebuild. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, the damage is going to be substantial. The damage is going to be throughout and on all levels of our industry. And I think in a magnitude that most of us at the moment cannot really fathom yet. Now, through this, through any crisis, there's also opportunity, and this is the little silver lining at the top there, that tourism is going to pick up again. At the moment, from an associational point of view, from private sector, we are doing everything in our power to actually source information, correct information, and try and find a balanced view on the way forward, which unfortunately changes on a daily or weekly basis because of new situations happening. We are very strongly advocating on a safe environment where tourism can still continue. As I've mentioned earlier, a local tourism approach would be the first step towards that, where we, as tourism players, ensure still the safety and that people keep the social distancing, as I've mentioned, through various measures, but at least that business or a fraction of business, what used to be, can continue. Through that, companies will be able to actually find a way on trimming probably their business operations to a smaller size, but at least they can continue their business versus the current situation where there's absolutely no hope. So those are things that are happening in the background. We are working very closely with all official agencies, ministries, such as the Ministry of Finance. I had a lengthy meeting last week in terms of figuring out ways on how the stimulus wage package could be distributed. As you all are aware, there's no definite answer that has been given yet. And last and probably most importantly, the tourism industry, the private sector in the background is organizing itself definitely for a post-COVID scenario, which entails that, for example, the NTB, when was it, 2 weeks ago, launched a very, very successful video, which basically had the message, hey, international tourists, the world is a crazy place at this moment. but will still be here once it's safe to travel, which means we're still keeping up that flame and that interest on international markets. And there's going to be challenges. There's going to be challenges that our normal distribution routes are going to be disrupted because, well, our partners internationally, half of the travel agency might also disappear who used to sell Namibia. So those are challenges that we are very aware of, that we are busy looking at on a daily basis on how we can mitigate the damages towards our own companies, our own employees here in Namibia, and in how we can help companies as well as individuals on moving through this. And our help, since we as an association or a representative body, we don't sit on piles of cash. Unfortunately, none of us in Namibia sits on piles of cash. But trying to find solutions on how we can figure out a way on how we can ensure the safety of our travelers, of our guests, of our staff, of ourselves, and through that also somehow survive the next couple of months and probably years, because I'm very much of the opinion that thereafter, as I said earlier, tourism will rebuild the economic damage that we have here and will be one of the first sectors to actually come out on the positive side again, because we have the possibility to generate cash and forex, which is very, very important for us as a country, very quickly. So for us at the moment, it's unfortunately a bit of a wait and see scenario. A lot will depend on how quickly international scientists can develop a vaccine, how quickly international source markets are allowing their nationals to travel overseas. In my opinion, there's going to be a scenario in the next couple of months where international travelers will probably be required to prove that they have been vaccinated or some kind of thing similar like to the yellow fever situation. But as I said, it depends on when that is going to happen. And for the time being, we need to hang 10. We have to somehow find a way to get through this.
All right, to that end, Mr. Schneider, last words and for us to round off this discussion.
Look, just last comments, I presume.
Yes,
Look,
yes.
Maybe my last comment is, as I said in the beginning, I think we as a nation need to look at a way where we're not deciding between economy and lives. I think we need to take an approach where we assume that both are possible at the same time. And once we take that stance, where we say, all right, we want to protect human lives, but how can we, through that, ensure that business can still continue? And I think that is something which is extremely important at this point in time, so that even outside of the tourism industry, we can give companies, and this is the entire economy in Namibia is being affected, that we can give companies and employees and virtually anybody some glimmer of hope that life will continue. And yes, there is going to be adjustment needed. And things will look very differently once we get through this. But I see this also as an opportunity where businesses, where individuals and whatever can concentrate it on their core businesses, on those things which they are good at, and excel at those and build up business models around this new situation on that.
Thank you very much, sir. Honourable Minister, last words.
Yes, although these uncertainties caused by the COVID-19, I'm very much optimistic that one day things will get right. Of course, there's a decline in the capital market, although we'll still have to have an uphill climbing. So, but in the end, we will come out of this with the lessons that in the future we need to plan more, we need to do more things, especially to ensure that we stimulate our own domestic market, especially the domestic tour traveling. We need to make sure that we work on that. But hopefully we will get there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nabe.
Yeah, thanks. Just to, in a final wrap up, to say what Ben was earlier saying is that when you look at our overseas markets currently, out of the top 10, 6 are very much heavily affected. That being Germany, France, Italy, UK, China, and USA. So already you can see out of your 10, your top 10, your 6 top are heavily affected. Possibly, maybe out of that is a lesson to be learned is that as a destination, we probably need to seriously consider diversifying our markets because we're not sure of these countries, how soon are they going to rebound, even if international travel is to be open, because of the health calamities that they have gone through. Their disposable income might have dwindled because tourism heavily relies on an amount of disposable income a person is having because it's seen to be a luxury item. So that adds on to or juxtaposed to what the Honorable Minister was saying, that definitely possibly time that we consistently and effortlessly need to see how best can we develop our domestic travel. And as I said, in terms of the models that are available, to ease gradually. Of course, you have to start, your starting point will be domestic, and then you branch off regionally. Possibly there is also another market segments that we need to look at how best going forward we need to develop. But again, as tourism businesses and operations, definitely after COVID-19, we need to then again relook at our pricing structures for us to be more attractive, can incentivize more traveling, and all the stakeholders, because I mean you have the airlines, you have the airports companies, because there's a whole component that needs to really revisit and reconfigure so that we are more attractive to really generate more travel into Namibia. But I guess, and it's known, given the ash volcano thing in Iceland, everything, tourism always rebounds. It's a very resilient industry. So we remain to be very positive and optimistic that definitely beyond COVID-19, there is going to be life that we can continue to sustain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nalbib. Thank you very much, my panelists, for bringing a positive element to this panel and the challenges that the tourism and hospitality industry is experiencing. That is all from us here at the COVID-19 Communications Centre with regards to that discussion. But please continue to join us as we discuss this afternoon. We're having a press conference by the Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Nadine Daitwa, around the alleged mistreatment and mandatory testing of African nationals in China, especially amidst COVID-19, to discuss then to see what would be the measures African countries will be taking in that regard. So thank you very much, viewers and listeners, for tuning in. Please continue to do so. Continue to make your phone calls to the toll-free number of the Ministry of Health and Social Services. That's 0800 100 100 should you have any COVID-19 related queries or questions, as well as continue sending your questions to our email address here at the COVID-19 Communications Centre. That is all from us. Have a good day.